Chapter 1. I'd long ago resigned myself to the fact that this day each year would be quite possibly the longest day of the school year. One would think the first day of school, Halloween, or the last day of school would be the craziest. But there is one day that outdoes any other day. The last day before Christmas break. The kids are buzzing with excitement about being off for a full month and the anticipation of what Santa might leave under the tree if he visits their house. As I finished unloading my truck in front of the school, I mentally went over the day ahead. It would start with a pancake breakfast, followed by Christmas caroling through the halls. The students would end their caroling at the gymnasium, where they would watch a Christmas movie and enjoy a visit from Santa's elves. When you are dealing with elementary students, you have to have all the stories figured out ahead of time and be consistent with them from year to year. In this case, the elves came for a visit because the jolly old man would be getting ready for the big parade and tree lighting later that evening. The day ends with classroom parties, food, prizes, and gifts. We then put the kids on the buses and send them home. In addition to taking care of my students, my duties also included serving the pancakes before moving over to the surprise hot cocoa and popcorn cart. This will greet the happy little carolers at the end of the hall as they made their way into the makeshift movie theater. On this day, it didn't seem to matter to the kids that Santa might not make it to their house because there was no money for presents. Our staff at the school did everything we could to send them off on winter break on a high note. Working in a poverty-ridden rural school was filled with challenges that only people who worked there could understand. Ms. Anderson, I'd like you to meet Joey. He is going to be joining your class today for the festivities. He will be your new student when we return from winter break, Jillian said as she escorted a shy-looking boy into my classroom. Welcome to our school and to our class, Joey. Miss Jillian told me you were coming, so I made a name tag for you and set up your desk, I said as I moved toward the desk I fixed for him. I showed him the supplies, gave him a tour of the room, and he explained all the fun activities we had lined up for that day. Come on, Miss Anderson, time to serve some pancakes, Mrs. Erickson said as she stuck her head through my classroom door. I wonder if the cute new history teacher will be there to help. Who? I asked nonchalantly as I grabbed my coat. Come on, Joey, let's go see if we can find some new friends for you. We made our way across the campus toward the cafeteria, stopping only when I spotted a group of boys from my class and introduced Joey to them. They assured me they would make sure he knew where to go when it was time for breakfast. Then it was on to the cafeteria where we were greeted by the principal, who handed us each a Christmas apron. Good morning, Miss Anderson. Just FYI, the new history teacher is in the kitchen helping to make the pancakes. The principal winked and walked away. I rolled my eyes and sighed loud enough for her to hear, which made her laugh. We found Tammy, the cafeteria lady in charge of the breakfast, and got our assignments. I took my place behind a giant tray of pancakes. It wasn't long until we heard excited chatter from the kids starting to make their way into the cafeteria. There were smiles and giggles as they made their way through the line, choosing from bacon, sausage, scrambled eggs, fruit, and of course pancakes. Today they got to choose where they wanted to sit instead of the normal class seating assignments. Christmas music played over the loudspeaker, which of course got the kids even more excited. Near the end of the breakfast, the cafeteria ladies made their way around to each table, giving out the first candy canes of the day. They wished the kids a Merry Christmas and told them they couldn't wait to see them in January. Our cafeteria staff fed the kids breakfast, lunch, and snack every school day. They knew that for a lot of the kids, those were the only meals they would have each day, and like the rest of us, they were concerned about the kids' welfare during the month-long break from school. Can I get that out of your way? A male voice asked, bringing my attention back to the tray of pancakes. I looked up and saw none other than the dreamy history teacher standing in front of the table of food. I tried to be casual. Yeah, sure, I guess? I stuttered, feeling like a complete idiot as I watched him walk away with the pancake tray. You need some work on flirting, the young Miss Gleason said as she swished by in her short skirt, perfectly curled hair, manicured nails, and high heels. Miss Gleason always had a snide remark to make, it seemed. She clearly wasn't a fan of Mrs. Erickson or me. "Don't worry about her," Mrs. Erickson whispered to me. "She might want you to think she is interested in the handsome history teacher, but a middle school teacher doesn't make enough money for her tastes." I shrugged. It didn't matter anyway, I thought to myself. He would never be interested in someone like me either. A loud cheer went up in the cafeteria when Santa's elves came in to help lead the caroling parade. We lined up the kids by class and gave each one a Santa hat and jingle bells. In other towns, the school kids might actually parade around the town or visit the nursing homes or hospitals to sing their carols. But in a rural area like ours, there is no town to parade around or any of the other places to visit. So we improvised and went caroling around the adjoining middle school. I traded my apron for a Santa hat and joined my class in the line of students. Away we went to the tune of "Up on the Housetop." Chapter 2. The entire parade lasted just over an hour, ending at the middle school gymnasium, where the wrestling mats covered the floor and the lights were turned off. The kids got a cup of hot cocoa and a bag of popcorn before entering the gym to watch the Polar Express. I watched as my class filed in and took their seats, noticing that Joey seemed to make friends with a few of the boys I'd introduced him to earlier that morning. There was no need for me to stay for the movie. Other teachers signed up for that job, but the Polar Express was one of my favorite Christmas movies. I took a cup of cocoa and a bag of popcorn and joined my class on the floor to enjoy the movie. Teachers and other volunteers that weren't on duty for the movie were busy in their classrooms setting up for the parties that would begin after lunch. I was fortunate enough to have several volunteers who would transform the classroom into a winter wonderland while the movie, lunch, and recess occupied the kids. By the time the movie ended, I had 2 kids asleep with their heads on my legs. It was a shame to wake them, but we needed to continue on with the day. I gently woke them up and held their hands on the way to the cafeteria, where I left them in line to get their lunch and then go out to recess. I took a deep breath and hoped the transformation had taken place in my room. I walked back into the building that housed my classroom and down the hall to check on the progress of the party preparations. "Wow, it looks fantastic in here," I exclaimed when I entered my room. The volunteers cleared the walls of the students' artwork and projects that I'd displayed for the past few months. Then they covered the walls with sheets of blue paper. Glittery white snowflakes, clouds, and snowmen with swirls of cotton along the bottom to mimic snow covered the blue paper. Fishing line with paper snowflakes and pulled apart cotton balls hung from the ceiling. There were boxes covered in white paper and stacked to form an igloo around the quiet corner, which was complete with a variety of penguins decked out in red and green scarves and hats. White tablecloths covered the desks. To finish the theme and add a bit of drama, the bright overhead lights were turned off and white twinkle lights were turned on. The transformation was magical. "Kids are going to love this. It's beautiful in here," Mrs. Erickson said with awe as she surveyed the room. "I wish I would have thought of a theme that wasn't Christmas specific. Now I have to come in over the break and change from Christmas to something else." "If you let me know when, I'll be happy to come in and help you," I offered, figuring I'd probably be here the last week of break anyway, since I rarely had anything else to do. Our winter break was comprised of the 2 weeks before Christmas and the 2 weeks after. If the weather was good, I would make at least one trip into the city before Christmas and one after Christmas to visit the various thrift stores in search of fabric and yarn. I would spend some time after Christmas cleaning, sorting, organizing, and most of the time leading up to Christmas sewing and crocheting. "I will only tell you when I'm coming here if you will join us for Christmas dinner. Come on! No one should be alone on Christmas," she begged like she did every year. "You know how I feel about that. Besides, I might have plans this year," I shrugged. "Every year you say that, and every year you end up alone. I hate the thought of you sitting home by yourself." "Let me think about it," I said as I heard the kids coming in from lunch recess. "Get ready. We have Christmas parties to throw." After multiple rounds of pin the nose on the snowman, the breaking of a snowflake-shaped piñata, pictures at the mini photo booth, we heard bells ringing in the hallway. The kids eagerly awaited the appearance of Santa's elves, who magically had a gift for each child in each classroom. The excitement level was at an all-time high as the kids received their gifts and went to the carpet, where they waited so everyone could open their gifts together. This year, each child was getting a stocking hat, mittens, chapstick, and a pencil case with pencils, crayons, and erasers. A few somewhat local businesses and residents donated the gifts. What wasn't donated we purchased with funds raised through bingo at the community center, a craft fair, and a community rummage sale. We never know if we'll be able to do gifts for all the kids or not, because ultimately it depends on the generosity of the community. I always give each of the kids in my class a book, a pillowcase, a pair of fuzzy socks, and some snack items. "Miss Anderson?" came a small voice from behind me. "Hi, Gabby. What's wrong?" I asked. "I think it's almost time to go to the buses, and you haven't given us our gifts yet," she whispered. I looked at the clock and almost panicked. Gabby was right. We only had about 15 minutes left until we had to pack up and go out to the buses. I gathered everyone up on the carpet one more time and started handing out the handmade pillowcases and other goodies I had for them. I had Gabby's older brother in my class 2 years before, so she knew what was coming. Once all the gifts were opened and the paper picked up, it was a mad rush to get things packed into backpacks and get to the buses. "I'll see you all later tonight at the tree lighting and parade," I said as they loaded onto the buses. There was always a mix of emotions when the buses pulled away. Elation that there was a month-long break, excitement for the upcoming holidays, fear that the kids wouldn't be taken care of, and sadness that many of them wouldn't have any kind of Christmas. It was always a strange time of the year. Chapter 3. Even though the buses were gone, there was no time to relax. The multi-event community Christmas was set to begin in a few hours. The 3-day event starts with the Santa parade and tree lighting ceremony. The following day there would be a large craft fair complete with a petting zoo and sleigh rides. Finally, on Sunday evening, the community Christmas dinner would be held. I had just enough time to do a quick clean of my classroom, gather my stuff, and go home to change before I needed to get to the parade staging area. Somehow, over the years, I'd been elected as president of the community center and therefore had the responsibility of overseeing the 4 major events held throughout the year. In addition to the community Christmas, there was the spring fling, summer shindig, and the fall festival. "I'll see you in a bit, Miss Erickson," I called into the room across the hall. I flung my coat on and hurried down the hall and out to my truck. As I left the parking lot of the school, I glanced toward Old Man Barlow's place and noticed that parade participants were already beginning to line up. I contemplated if I should just go over there or if I had enough time to go home first. I looked down at my school teacher attire and decided it wasn't going to be warm enough for being out in the cold. If I hurried, I could make it back with plenty of time to spare. After a record-setting time for changing clothes, I headed back to Barlow's place. Old Man Barlow volunteered his driveway and barn for the parade staging every year. He didn't do it out of the kindness of his heart, however. There was always a catch and usually involved some kind of work to his place. One year volunteers painted the outside of his house. Another year people helped him fix all his fencing. This year we would be cleaning out and repairing the barn. All in all, it was a small price to pay to help someone in the community who always gave so much back. I parked my truck at the school and walked over to Barlow's driveway. In a small community, it is always the same entries for the parade and always the same people who made everything happen. This year was no exception. Sitting in the first parade spot was Sheriff Sergeant Dan Daniels, one of our local law enforcement officers. It was a tradition for someone from the sheriff's department to lead the parade. The reality was that if we wanted a sheriff's deputy in the parade or a fire truck, they had to be either at the very beginning or the very end in case they needed to pull out to attend to an emergency. I stopped at each entry and ran through my usual spiel of how the parade would work. I also made sure if it was a vehicle that the driver was licensed. Slowly but surely I made my way to the end of the line and headed toward the barn where Santa's sleigh was hidden. There was a truck backed up to the barn, but it wasn't Daryl's truck. No one was around, so I got out my phone and tried to call Mrs. Erickson. "It's me. I'm at the barn and there's a truck here, but it isn't Daryl's and there isn't anyone around. Give me a call back if you have any idea where Mr. White is or Daryl," I said to the voice message system and hung up. "Hey there," I heard a slightly familiar voice say. I turned and was surprised to see the history teacher walking toward me. "Oh, hello," I replied. "No one is supposed to be back here. Is there something I can help you with?" "I volunteered to pull the sleigh," he said with a smile. "Oh, what happened to Daryl?" "His truck is in the shop," he explained. "Oh, okay. Well, um, thank you," I stuttered. "I'm happy to help out. So if I understand this right, once the parade starts moving, then we open the barn door and hook up the trailer to the truck? The sleigh actually rides on the trailer?" "Yes. The trailer is decorated to look like the sleigh would be flying through the night sky. We try to lend a bit of magic to the night so no one sees Santa or his sleigh until the very end of the parade." "Okay," he replied. Since the parade started about 20 years ago, the story is that Santa flew in just for the parade and tree lighting. His reindeer are tired, so we put his sleigh on a trailer so the reindeer can rest and Santa can be in the parade," I blurted out. He laughed. "That makes sense in a small town sort of way." "We do what we can," I shrugged, not knowing if he was complimenting our creativeness or making fun of us. "Have you seen Santa by any chance?" "No. I was told he would meet me right here, though," he said. "Yeah, he should be here by now," I said, looking around, hoping Mr. White was somewhere talking to someone. "You stay here in case he shows up. I'll go ask if anyone has seen him." I walked around the immediate area of the barn looking for Mr. White, who was to be our Santa, as he was every year since we started these festivities. No one in the parade line had seen him either. As I made my way back to the barn, hoping he had somehow slipped by me, I heard someone calling my name. "Katie! Oh, Katie, wait up!" yelled Miss Peterson, the principal from the school. "I got a call from Mr. White's wife. It seems that Mr. White fell and ended up having hip replacement surgery 2 days ago. He isn't going to be able to be Santa this year." "What? Oh no! What are we going to do?" I cried out in disbelief. Chapter 4. Hold on. She said they arranged for someone else to take his spot. There is some sort of Santa group Mr. White belongs to. Look around, there should be a Santa wandering around here somewhere." She filled me in on the conversation she'd had with Mrs. White regarding the health of our beloved Santa. "I've been all around here and haven't seen any Santas wandering around," I said with a slight panic in my voice. "She said she left his Santa suit in the community center, just in case." Whatever that means. "It means she was worried that whoever they got to fill in might not show up," I sighed. "Now what? There is only a few minutes left before the parade starts. How will we ever find someone to play Santa?" "I'd be honored to play Santa if someone wants to pull the sleigh," the new teacher spoke up. "Seriously? That would be fantastic!" I cheered. Miss Peterson ran to get the suit from the community center, which just so happens to be next door to the school. "By the way, we haven't been formally introduced, but my name is Brian Carter. I'm the new history teacher at the middle school," he said, extending his hand to shake mine. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Carter. I'm Katie Anderson, second grade teacher," I replied with a smile. "Oh, second grade? You are brave," he laughed. That was the reaction most people had when they found out I spend my days wrangling 7-year-olds. "I was thinking that you are the brave one dealing with preteens. They aren't as horrible as everyone thinks, as long as you can engage them with great material and pretend to be cool." He shrugged as he opened the door to his truck and reached in to turn it on. "I guess we should get this thing hooked up and ready to go. Are you comfortable driving a truck and pulling a trailer?" "I drive a truck every day, as a matter of fact, and a trailer is no big deal." I assured him that I was fully capable of driving a truck. Some people might have taken offense to his insinuation that I couldn't drive a truck, but it didn't bother me at all. Being a public school teacher for 20 years has taught me to not be sensitive to things people say. Miss Peterson returned with the Santa suit, which Mr. Carter immediately changed into so he was ready. He opened the barn door so he could back the truck the rest of the way up to the trailer and hook it up. I heard the band start playing, which signaled the start of the parade. As the parade participants started to shuffle along, Brian turned the lights on in the barn so we could see what we were doing. Ms. Anderson? I think I found your missing Santa, Mr. Carter said. I turned around quickly. Sitting in the sleigh was a fully dressed Santa who appeared to be fast asleep. I quickly went to the side of the sleigh and gently shook the Santa, shrieking loudly when he fell over and his hat, hair, and beard fell off. "He isn't sleeping. He's dead," I said to Mr. Carter, who had joined me at the side of the sleigh. "Dead? Are you sure?" he asked, his face draining of every color but green. "Fairly certain," I replied with a snarkiness that I didn't intend, but it came out anyway. I fished my phone from my pocket and called the sheriff's department. I explained the situation, and due to the fact that the man was dressed as Santa, I asked that they come in quietly so no one would draw attention. "Someone is on their way from the sheriff's department," I told him. "What do we do now?" "I'm not sure. Everyone is expecting to see Santa at the end of the parade, and the last float is leaving right now." I pointed at the line of parade participants out on the road, snaking its way around the school and community center. "The show must go on. We can't disappoint the kids. If you'll drive the truck, I'll hop in the back and wave to the crowd from there. It might not be perfect, but it's better than nothing," he rationalized. "Sounds like a plan. Let's close the barn door and get rolling. If anyone asks, Santa's sleigh is having some repairs done to it," I suggested. "Perfect," Mr. Carter said as he climbed into the truck. "Perfect," Mr. Carter said as he climbed into the back of his truck and adjusted the Santa suit he was wearing. I climbed into the cab and gently started to roll down the long driveway and out toward the road. I finally caught up to the last parade float, which made me sigh with relief. Although not ideal, the parade lineup was complete and we had a Santa. As we got closer to the community center, there were more and more people lining the sides of the road, waving and cheering. Then, all of a sudden, I could hear the song. "Here Comes Santa Claus," starting to play loudly. A cheer erupted from young and old gathered close by. The arrival of Santa never failed to disappoint me. You could feel a wave of magic float through the crowd. Suddenly, everyone was a kid again for a few minutes as they sang along with the song and waved at the jolly old man in the back of a truck. Thank goodness they didn't know that there was another Santa, dead in his sleigh. Chapter 5. Once we got to the community center, I parked as quickly as I could and helped usher Santa into the building. Mr. Carter would have a few minutes to warm up and get something to eat before he would appear at the Christmas tree for the official lighting. After the tree lighting, he would sit for an hour and a half for pictures with the kids. I glanced sideways at him and was reassured by his smile and laugh that he was having a good time. I hoped he wouldn't quit when he found out there was more to the evening than just riding in the parade. He had a real twinkle in his eye, and the frosty night air chapped his cheeks enough to make them rosy. If I didn't know better, I would have sworn Santa's younger brother was standing there. "What should I say if someone recognizes me?" Mr. Carter asked. "Santa has helpers all over the world that help him with parades and pictures because he can't be everywhere. He has to save his magic for Christmas Eve when he delivers presents all over the world," I told him. "Wow, that's an impressive line. Did you just make that up on the spot?" I laughed. "No, we've used it for years. Inevitably, someone always asks." "Got it. So what's next?" he asked. "Now it's time to go out and light the tree. Santa has helpers all over the world that help him with parades and pictures because he can't be everywhere. He has to save his magic for Christmas Eve when he delivers presents all over the world," I told him. "Then we ask that they keep it a secret." Wow, that's an impressive line. Did you just make that up on the spot? I laughed. No, we've used it for years. Inevitably, someone always asks. Got it. So what's next? He asked. Now it's time to go out and light the tree. The high school choir will sing a song, and as soon as that is done, you will step forward and thank everyone for coming to the celebration. Then plug the lights in. When the band plays, that is your cue to head inside for pictures. I explained the process and let him know that there was plenty of help in the picture room and that I would be nearby if problems came up. We walked out to the tree and listened to the choir sing a melody of Christmas songs. Then Mr. Carter stepped forward and thanked the crowd before lighting up the tree. The crowd cheered and then dispersed while the band took their turn playing some Christmas favorites. Mr. Carter and I made our way back inside into the picture room where there was already a long line of excited kids waiting to tell him what their heart desired for Christmas. This was always the hardest part for me. I knew that most of them wouldn't get anything close to what they hoped for, and many wouldn't get anything at all. With the picture line going smoothly, I wandered toward the kitchen hoping for a cup of coffee or cocoa, something, anything warm. "Why is that new teacher playing Santa, and where is the sleigh?" Mrs. Erickson asked as she handed me a steaming cup of coffee. I motioned to her to come closer. Whispering, I said, "We found the guy I think was Mr. White's replacement tonight, dead in the sleigh." "What?" she shrieked. I pushed my eyebrows together and gave her the same look I give my class when they won't quiet down. "Shh! We don't want the entire world to know." "Sorry. Oh my gosh, did you see him?" "Who?" "The dead Santa." "Well, yes. Mr. Carter and I found him when we opened the barn door to hook up the trailer with the sleigh on it." "Was it gruesome?" I had to laugh at her strange question. If you are wondering if there was blood everywhere, then no, it wasn't gruesome. He looked like he was either asleep or passed out. "Oh," she replied in a disappointed tone. "So, how did he die?" "I don't have any idea. All I know is that he was dead when we found him. We called the sheriff's department, then hurried to get Mr. Carter into the back of the truck so we could catch up to the parade." "Wow, that had to be exciting. Do you know who it was?" "Not a clue," I shrugged, not wanting to answer any more of her weird questions. "I bet someone killed him," she announced. "Why would you automatically think that?" She shrugged. "I don't know. Just seems like that is what would happen to someone like that." "What do you mean by someone like that?" I asked, using air quotes. "Oh, nothing. Oh, nothing." She turned to busy herself with something on the counter. "Well, I suppose the sheriff will figure it out," I said, hoping to change the subject. "I should probably go check to see how the pictures with Santa are going." "Well, I suppose the sheriff will figure it out," I said, hoping to change the subject. "I should probably go check to see how the pictures with Santa are going." I hurried away from Mrs. Erickson as quickly as I could without appearing to be rude. I would never want her to think I was rude or didn't want to talk to her. But right now was not the time to go into details or try to figure out what happened to the Santa. Besides, her questions were rather weird. "Ms. Anderson?" I heard someone calling me as I tried to make my way across the community center to the room where Mr. Carter was sitting for pictures. I turned to see Sergeant Daniels walking toward me. "Hi, Dan. How are you tonight?" I asked. "Could be better. Never expected to have to deal with a dead body tonight," he sighed. Sergeant Daniels and I had been friends for almost as long as I'd been teaching at the school. We met when his son was in my class. He was going through a rough divorce, and Danny was having a hard time with it. "Tell me about it. It was quite a shock to see the poor guy sitting in the sleigh." "That's what I need to talk to you about. You left before I got there. Why?" I explained that the parade had already started, and I had to get Santa in the lineup. He lectured me about leaving the scene and went so far as telling me that if the man met with foul play, that I might be considered a suspect. Laughing. "A suspect? Me? Really? You can't be serious." The look he gave me told me he was very serious. Chapter 6. Can you believe he would even begin to think that I would have anything to do with the death of that guy? I asked, still astonished that Dan would tell me I might be a suspect. Even worse than that was he didn't even give me a chance to tell him the entire story before he walked away to take a phone call, then never came back. "I don't know what you see in that guy," Mrs. Erickson blurted out. "He's a nice guy. We've been friends forever," I shrugged. "Sounds like a business arrangement, not a marriage." "Whoa, wait a minute. Who said anything about marriage?" I stuttered. "Who's getting married?" Santa asked as he came up behind us. "No," I started and was interrupted by Mrs. Erickson. "Miss Anderson and Sergeant Daniels." "Oh, well, congratulations," he said before asking if there were any more Santa duties he needed to attend to. He went to change and I went to help clean up the photo room. Lucky for me, by the time I got there, the kids from the high school had it mostly cleaned up. We would be back the following day to move the decorations around in preparation for the community dinner that would wrap up the weekend. "Sorry I disappeared. Had to go handle a call for service," Sergeant Daniels said when he found me in the picture room. "Everything okay?" "For now. I'm sure one of us will be back to that house in a day or two. The holidays always cause so many family problems." He shook his head. I knew Christmas was a rough time for our deputies. They were away from their families, trying to keep other families from falling apart. "We are about done here until morning, when we will be back to set up for the dinner. I'd invite you over for some hot cocoa or coffee, but you're on duty, so I'm going to head home and get warm," I told him, hoping he'd forgotten that earlier he considered me a suspect. "How about if I follow you home? We can have that cup of coffee while we talk about why you left the scene earlier tonight." Darn it. Just wanted to go home, get warmed up, and go to bed. I didn't want to explain over and over why I left the dead body in the barn exactly how I'd found him. After all these years, I couldn't believe he thought I could possibly have anything to do with the death of another human. If he accused me of killing a spider or a snake, he would have a case, but never a human. "Let's go. I'm freezing," I told him, then turned sharply and made my way to the door and out to my truck. All the way to my house, I hoped he would be called away, but luck wasn't on my side. He was still behind me as I pulled into the driveway and got out to open the gate. I pulled through the gate and stopped to wait until he came through so I could close it behind him. Having a gate is just part of living in the country. Dan yelled out that he would get the gate. I went ahead around the house and parked in my usual spot in front of the garage. There is no formality when you live in the country. Everyone uses the back door. I guess because that is where the parking is, and the back door usually leads into a mudroom or laundry room where you can leave your dirty shoes. As I climbed out of the truck, I clicked the garage door opener, which revealed my work table and the chaos that was my current status. Holy cow, it looks like... Well, I'm not sure, but... Wow! The promise was made more to myself than to him. I know, it's a bit of a disaster, but we were in the final stretches of getting the blankets ready for the dinner, and we have another load going to the food bank next week. Once they're done, I'll get it all cleaned up and organized again. The promise was made more to myself than to him. The sight of the garage was a bit overwhelming, and I had to remind myself that it was only temporary. There was fabric of every color and pattern imaginable piled up on the workbenches that lined the perimeter of the space. In the center was a huge work table with 4 sewing machines and even more fabric. There were dozens of quilts hanging from several closet rods suspended by chains. It was hard to tell, but the concrete floor of the garage was actually covered with carpet. But there were so many fabric scraps and pieces of thread, there was no way to know what color the carpet was. It was the busiest time of the year for me, making sure that my class had a great Christmas party, the community had a great celebration, and to try and make sure that kids and seniors had warm quilts. "I don't know how you do it all," he shook his head. "I don't know how you do it all," he shook his head, amazed at not only the mess, but at the amount of work I took on at this time of year. I shrugged my shoulders. What else would I be doing? I don't have any family of my own, so I might as well help those that can't help themselves. I admire you for that. Maybe you'll have a family of your own someday. Chapter 7. You want a sandwich or something to go with your coffee? I asked Dan as I handed him a cup of fresh hot coffee. That would be great. I didn't have time to eat earlier, he said as he took a seat at the kitchen table. We made small talk while I made a sandwich for each of us. As we ate, the conversation wound around all aspects of the day and evening, except the part where the dead man was found. I cleaned up the kitchen and poured him another cup of coffee, then sat back down at the table. Okay, go ahead. Let's get this out of the way. Ask me about the dead Santa and why I left before you got there. Look, I'm sorry to have to go through this, but you found him and you left. It honestly wasn't the smartest thing to do. Just start from the beginning and tell me everything that happened. Questions about the evening had been rolling around in my head for hours. It seemed like everything but the dead Santa made sense. Instead of starting at the beginning like Dan told me, I blurted out, Mr. Carter volunteered to pull the sleigh, but then Santa didn't show up, so Mr. Carter offered to be Santa. We decided to put him in the back of the truck after finding the dead Santa in the sleigh. Hold on. Who is Mr. Carter? He's the new teacher at the middle school. I watched as he wrote down the information about Mr. Carter. I figured he would want to talk to him next to make sure our stories matched. What time did you meet there? He continued with the questions. We didn't intend to meet there. I got there just before dark to meet Daryl, who was supposed to pull the sleigh like he usually does. Mr. Carter showed up and said that Daryl's truck was in the shop and that he had volunteered to pull the sleigh this year. You weren't aware of Daryl's situation? No. What did you do when Mr. Carter showed up? I explained to Mr. Carter how the evening works. That as soon as the parade started, we would open the barn doors and hook up the trailer to the truck. We do that in case there are people walking around. And you know, it's Santa, so it's supposed to be magical and secretive. What time was that? I'm not sure of the exact time. I just know that I hadn't seen Santa yet and was getting worried. Mr. White always waits for me to get there, then goes into the barn, puts on his Santa suit, and gets settled in the sleigh. Mrs. Erickson came over in a rush and said that Mrs. White had called to say that Mr. White had had hip replacement surgery and was not able to do the parade. Supposedly, they found somebody else to do it, but she also sent Mr. White's Santa suit just in case. Just in case what? He asked. I shrugged. Your guess is as good as mine. I figured maybe they didn't know the Santa that they found to replace Mr. White and were worried he might not be reliable? I mean, why else would you send a Santa suit? Just in case. Then what? He asked. Mr. Carter volunteered to be Santa. He said that if I would drive his truck to pull the sleigh, he would play Santa. And you agreed to that? Yes. What else were we going to do? At that point in time, we needed a Santa. It was time for the parade to start, so Mr. Carter changed into the suit just as he finished. It was time for the parade to start, so Mr. Carter changed into the suit. Just as he finished, we heard the band begin to play, so we opened the barn door. I stopped and sighed. Seriously, do we really need to go over this again? Do you have any idea who the guy in the barn was or what happened to him? Was he really killed? We don't know anything at the moment, Dan said. Even if I did, I'm not at liberty to share details with you. So, any idea why Mr. Carter would suddenly be so eager to help? Do you know if he knew the victim? I have no idea other than he is new to the school and wants to be involved. I shrugged. Then it dawned on me. Wait. You don't think Mr. Carter had anything to do with the man's death, do you? First me, now Mr. Carter. I don't think I want to answer any more questions tonight. I'm sorry you don't like the questions. It's just routine. I have to figure out what might have happened to the man in the sleigh. I get that. But when you don't even know how he died, why are you asking questions and seemingly lining up suspects? I said with frustration. You know I didn't kill anybody, and I'm sure Mr. Carter didn't kill anybody. I've already given you the timeline of events. Obviously, the man was dead before either Mr. Carter or I got to the barn. That's my next question. When you got to the barn, did you see anybody else around there? Well, of course there's other people around there. And since the parade lines up down the driveway, people were coming to the end of the driveway by the barn to turn around and take their place in line. As for right at the barn, no, I didn't see anybody. Would you happen to have a list of people that were in the parade? I have the entries with the drivers' names, but not the names of everyone that participated. We don't have things happen like this out here, so it's kind of a big deal with our department to make sure that everything is handled correctly. The sheriff is up for re-election, and there could be a lot of people looking at this, if indeed it is foul play, Danny explained. I get it, but do we really have to keep going through it? I'm tired and I'm ready to crawl in bed. I have a long weekend ahead. Sure, we can be done for now. I know it's been a long day for you. If you can get me that list, it will give me a lot to work on once I hear back from the coroner. I'll get it to you, but it might not be for a day or two. Tomorrow's a busy day, and then we're getting ready for the community dinner. I trailed off thinking of everything I had yet to do over the weekend. That's okay. Get it to me as soon as you can and we'll go from there. By the way, thanks for the sandwich. I'm sorry for having to go through all this. I walked him to the door and waited until he was in his car before I shut and locked everything up for the night. After watching his taillights disappear down the street, I decided I would make myself a cup of chamomile tea and take a hot bath. I hoped it would help me to relax a little bit before crawling into bed. Chapter 8. Even though school was on break for an entire month, I continued to work even on Saturday. I was expecting several quilt drop-offs today, and several of my quilting friends were coming over to finish this year's quilts. I made a big pot of coffee and made a quick batch of buttery Christmas cookies. Mrs. Erickson was going to bring sandwiches, and the other two quilters were bringing snacks. After I took the last tray of cookies from the oven, I slipped into some candy cane print stretchy pants and pulled on a long white sweater. Quick ponytail for my hair and some comfy winter boots for my feet, and I was ready to head to the garage for the final work day of the season. The mess was not unusual this time of year, yet every time I opened the door, it was overwhelming. I started the Warm Winter Nights charity the first year I spent at the school. Finding out how poor the kids were and how much they needed a warm hug, I put my hobby to work and started making quilts out of whatever scrap fabric I could get my hands on. At first I offered the quilts to the school to keep in the clothing closet in case one of the kids said they didn't have a blanket, or if we found out one of the kids was going through a really bad time. It wasn't long before other teachers offered to help make the quilts, and word spread. Community members started dropping off quilts and afghans at the school, and before we knew it, we were out of room to keep them. That was when I turned the whole idea into a nonprofit organization and moved everything to my garage. I could categorize the quilts by gender and age, making it easier to get a quilt when needed. When I met Dan, he asked if he could have a couple of quilts for his patrol car to give to kids he came across that needed them. Soon, all the patrol cars carried a couple of quilts. Donations of fabric and yarn grew, and eventually I had to ask for volunteers to help make the quilts with supplied fabric. I found several people who were more than happy to make the quilts and afghans, but couldn't afford the supplies, so it worked out great. I even ended up with several sewing machines donated to the organization. We always have quilts available and often sell them to help fund making more. A few years ago, we started giving quilts to senior citizens as well as the kids. I'd been contemplating expanding to collect pajamas and socks, but wasn't sure where I would be able to store more stuff. There was never enough money to buy a storage shed, and renting one would be impractical. So until I came up with a storage solution, I had to hold off on expanding. While the garage warmed up from the heat of various strategically placed heaters and a newly installed wood stove, I worked madly picking up scraps from the floor, clearing the work table, and inventorying newly dropped off quilts. I added to the mess the previous night when I pulled down some quilts for Dan's patrol car. Just as I finished hanging the last quilt, I heard a car pull up. "Good morning, Jan. Glad you could make it today," I greeted one of the sewing volunteers. Jan climbed from her SUV and started pulling stuff from the back. What is all this? I know you aren't ready to start with the pajamas yet, but when one of the groups I belonged to asked what they could do to help, I couldn't resist telling them about warm winter nights. They were so excited, and at the next meeting there were piles of fabric, pajamas, and socks. Wow, that is fantastic! I guess I don't have a choice now. I'll just have to figure out how to store all the extra stuff. I'll work on that this coming week. As we finished unloading Jan's SUV, Mrs. Erickson pulled up, followed by someone dropping off more donations. When we finally made it into the garage, Jan was already busy working on piecing together a quilt. The quilts were simple, a few pieces put together, then sewn to the backing with some batting in between. Years ago, we'd perfected being able to make several quilts in a day. My hope was to try to use up all the scrap pieces of fabric so we could start the new year with the new larger pieces of fabric. I looked around the garage and wondered how to bring in more storage for the pajamas and socks. No ideas came to me. Everyone was busy with some sort of the quilt making process, so I took the opportunity to go into the house and fix a tray of snacks and another pot of coffee. It would really make sense to put a coffee maker in the garage, but I didn't know where. There just wasn't any room anywhere for a coffee maker. I needed more room. As I gathered everything up to take to the garage, I heard another vehicle pull up. "Good morning," I shouted and waved as I juggled the tray of snacks. "I'll be right out." I hurried into the garage and left the snacks in the middle of the work table, then headed out to help with the drop-off. "How many quilts do you have?" "Quickly running out of room, so I might have to put them in the house," I said without looking up. I have no idea," said a familiar voice. "Oh, Mr. Carter," I stammered, surprised to see him in my driveway. Chapter 9. "Good morning. What a nice surprise," he said as he handed me a bag of quilts. "I didn't know you were the one collecting the quilts." "'Tis the season," I said cheerfully. I took the bag he handed me and watched as he reached into the back of the small SUV he was driving. "Did your wife make all these?" He laughed. "Actually, my mom and her Bible study group made these. She wasn't feeling well today and asked me to deliver them to you." "I'm sorry to hear that. I hope she feels better soon." "Thanks, but it's a total lie." He shook his head. "Oh," I responded. I wasn't sure what he was referring to. That group of busybodies decided they needed to play matchmaker for me and sent me here with these quilts and stuff. His statement made me feel like if he'd had a choice, he wouldn't have made the delivery. Completely surprised, I wasn't sure how to respond. I'm sure I looked like an idiot trying to figure out quickly what to say. "Well, I guess I'm sorry to have interfered with your day. Thank you for bringing this stuff by," I said as I gathered a couple of the bags to take in the house. "Oh, it isn't really a big deal. Where do you want these?" "I'm putting everything in the house so I can sort them before the community Christmas dinner." "Do you need any help with anything?" he stuttered. "I don't want to keep you. I'm sure you have better things to do on a Saturday." His change of attitude confused me. First, he seemed put out because the Bible group had sent him, and then he seemed almost eager to help. Truth be told, I really have nothing else to do today. I finished my shopping, and besides, it gets me out of the house and away from my mom, he confessed. "You live with your mom?" I asked in shock. I tried not to snicker. "A long story, but yes, I'm temporarily living with my mom." He sighed and looked away. Whatever the story was, he didn't seem like he wanted to talk about it, so I let it go and headed into the house. "You can just set those bags there." I pointed to the other bags by the dining table. "Cute place. You live here alone?" I was a little surprised at the question. "Another long story, but yes, I live here alone." "Sorry, that was a bit personal." He apologized and moved toward the door. "I'll grab those last couple of bags." I worked on cleaning up the mess in the kitchen from making the snacks while I waited for him to come back with the rest of the quilts. The entire encounter was rather awkward. I wasn't sure what to make of it. "Have you heard anything about the Santa from last night?" he asked as he came back into the house. I told him about my conversation with Sergeant Daniels and let him know I was sure Dan would talk to him. "No problem. I have nothing to hide, and I'm sure my story matches yours," he shrugged. "So, what is this community Christmas dinner you mentioned?" "Some members of the community get together and solicit donations to host a Christmas dinner for the members of the community, specifically the seniors that might not otherwise have a holiday dinner." "When do you have time for yourself? Between the parades, quilts, teaching, and a community dinner?" I shrugged. "I don't have a family, so everything I do is for me as much as it is for the community. I get to have a holiday meal with some of my students, their parents, and some of our senior citizens." "So when is this dinner, and is there anything you need help with?" "The dinner is tomorrow night. We give out the rest of the quilts. If you want to come over, I'm sure we can find a job for you to do. We always need extra volunteers." "Just let me know what time to be there. I'd love to help," Mr. Carter said cheerfully. "Well, I need to be there by 1 o'clock to unload the storage shed. Others will start coming in around 2 to start making the dinner and setting up the tables. So whenever you want is fine. I will be there at 1 o'clock then to help you unload everything from the shed." "Oh, you don't have to be there at 1 o'clock," I said in a hurry. "Nope. You need help, so I will be there at 1 to help you unload the shed. Is there anything else that I can help with today?" "It looks like you have your hands full," he said as he pointed toward the garage where we heard loud laughing. "I think we've got today under control. As soon as everybody's done here, I will take a load of quilts to the community center, and then I will only have one more load tomorrow morning. You know, we've done this for quite a few years, so we've got it down pretty good." Mr. Carter laughed and shrugged. "Okay then. I guess if you need anything, call me." "Will do." I watched as Mr. Carter got in the car and drove out of the driveway and down the road. With Mr. Carter gone, I went back to the garage to help finish the quilts for the day. I returned to a chorus of cheers and women making kissy noises in an attempt to tease me. "Inquiring minds need to know if you have a date with Mr. Carter," one of the ladies sang out. "No, I don't. He simply brought a donation of quilts from his mother's Bible study group. She was not feeling well today and asked him to make the delivery," I tried to explain. The ladies around the table started laughing. "Sure she didn't feel good," was the chorus from everyone around the garage. They were relentless and continued the teasing. "But he's not interested, so can we just move on and get these things done so I could take a trip over to the storage shed?" "He's nice enough, but he's not interested. So can we just move on and get these things done so I can take a trip over to the storage shed? I don't want anything to happen to these quilts before the dinner tomorrow night," I pled. Everyone got back to work and finished up the quilts. There was a lot of gossip that I tended not to listen to because I didn't really like knowing all the negative stuff that was going on in our little community. Others thrive on it. So I just let them go and busied myself with packaging up the finished quilts. Chapter 10. "Are you sure you don't want me to go over to the storage unit with you?" Mrs. Erickson asked. "No, I'm good. It'll only take a few minutes. Everything's loaded into the truck and it's still daylight out. I just want to go drop the stuff off and get back before dark." "Okay. Well, if you can think of anything you need done tonight or in the morning, you know how to get a hold of me," she said as she climbed into her car. I waved and told her she would be the first one I would call. As soon as she was through the gate, I grabbed my purse and left for the community center. I knew it wouldn't take me long. The weather was getting stormy, so I made sure that the garage door was down and headed down the street. The community center is just across the highway that runs through town. In less than 5 minutes, I pulled into the empty parking lot. I had a key to the storage shed in the back, so I pulled up to open the shed and put all the quilts in there. I made sure I locked the shed before I made the return trip home. As I pulled up to the stop sign to cross the highway, the sign at the little cafe caught my attention. Tired and hungry, I stopped there to pick up something to have for dinner so I wouldn't have to make myself anything. Lucky for me, Judy was there and had just finished making a pot of cheddar broccoli soup, which is my favorite. I got a container of that and a BLT to go. I thanked Judy for the dinner and told her I would see her tomorrow for the community dinner. What in the world? I yelled as I pulled around to the garage. The garage door was open and there was fabric all over the front of the garage. It looked like somebody had ransacked it. Before I got out of my car, I called Dan and asked him to come over and check it out to make sure there was nobody around. When he arrived, he looked around the garage, then went in the house and came back out. Doesn't look like anyone went in the house. No sign of anyone around out here either, he said. He suggested I take pictures so if anything was missing or broken, I could turn it into my homeowner's insurance. I went around and took a few pictures. As near as I could tell, it didn't appear that anything had been broken, and it looked like everything was there. Everything was just torn apart, almost like somebody was looking for something. Are you sure you shut the garage door when you left? The wind has been blowing pretty hard this evening, Dan asked. Yes, I specifically remember closing the garage door because I knew it was going to storm. How long were you gone? Maybe a total of 30 minutes. It took me probably 5 minutes to get over to the community center. I unloaded everything and then I went to the cafe. Judy fixed me a container of soup and a BLT, then I came home. 30 minutes tops. So somebody had to have been waiting for you to leave. They knew where you were going and came in and did this, is what I'm thinking. Can you tell me everybody that was here today? I'd like to match that up to the people from the parade. Sure, it was the usual group. You know, the ones that do everything in the community. And was Mr. Carter here by any chance? Yes, he was. He brought a delivery of quilts from his mom. You're not still thinking he has something to do with the Santa, are you? I don't know. Things like this just don't regularly happen out here. If I'm honest, I'll tell you, he seemed pretty interested in the community dinner and he wanted to help. It didn't seem strange at the time, but now that you seem to think everything's strange, maybe it is strange, I shrugged. Don't you worry about what's strange and what's not. Let me worry about that. You have plenty to do. Go inside and have your dinner. Get a good night's sleep. I will see you tomorrow at the community center, Dan said as he got in his car and left. I went in and had my dinner and tried to get some sleep. This night for me is usually a sleepless one anyway, because I'm constantly running over everything in my head to prepare for the dinner. On top of the normal thoughts was the idea that somebody had been on my property and in my garage. That set my nerves on edge. Maybe it was time to get a dog. I'd have to give that some serious thought. Chapter 11. I finally gave up trying to sleep and crawled out of bed. Knowing I had a long day ahead of me, I dressed comfortably, had a piece of toast and a cup of tea, and headed out to the garage to clean up some of the mess from the night before. Thankfully, the remaining quilts were in the house and not in the garage, or they probably would have been ruined. After doing my best to put some kind of order to the mess, I headed toward the community center. I started the heater, turned on the oven in the kitchen and all the lights. I also put on some Christmas music before I went out to the shed to get everything we would need for the evening. I held my breath as I unlocked the door to the shed. I hoped and prayed that nothing had happened to anything inside it. My eyes went right to the bags of quilts I brought over the previous day. I'd stacked them on the right-hand side of the shed so I could get to the tablecloths, paper plates, and plasticware that were toward the back. I purposely left a small path to the back of the shed so it would be easier to get to the stuff we would need. We bought stuff on clearance and accepted donations after Christmas, so the stuff always ended up at the back of the shed by the time Christmas rolled around each year. As I started grabbing the boxes of stuff, the door on the shed slammed shut. I guess I'd forgotten to prop it open so the wind wouldn't blow it shut. What in the heck? I said to myself as I pushed on the door to the shed. It wouldn't budge. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge either. I was locked in. Worse than that, someone had locked me in. Who would do that? It had to be done on purpose. I patted my pocket to check for my phone and remembered that I'd left it on the counter in the kitchen next to the tray of cookies I'd brought. I wasn't even sure exactly what time it was. I knew it wouldn't be too long before others started showing up to get ready for the dinner. Someone would see my stuff in my car and come looking. I hoped. While I waited for someone to find me, I worked on moving everything for the dinner toward the front of the shed and then tried to reorganize the rest of the stuff. I could hear the wind outside getting stronger, and it was getting colder. It had to be getting close to time for someone to show up. There wasn't much more I could do, so I grabbed a couple of quilts and found a place to sit and wait. I found a backpack that was left over from our back-to-school giveaway, and inside was a few pencils and a notebook. I started making the list that Dan asked me for. Finally, I heard someone yell my name and rattle the handle of the shed. "I'm here!" I yelled. "Do you have the key with you?" "No, it was in the lock," I sighed, realizing whoever locked me in here had taken the key. "I think I'm going to have to get a chainsaw or something to cut an opening for you to get out." "No, don't do that. Get my phone, call Kim, and see if she's on her way. She has a key and should be here by now. By the way, what time is it? And who am I talking to?" "It's almost 2 o'clock and it's Mr. Carter. I'll be right back." I waited and finally heard someone opening the shed door. "Oh, Dan? I didn't expect to see you," I exclaimed with surprise. "I saw your car, so I thought I'd stop and get the list of seniors I needed to pick up and bring to the dinner. Kim was just getting here and told me what was going on," he explained. "Thank you for opening the door. I'll get the list for you. It's in my bag in the kitchen," I said and walked back to the community center. "So, Mr. Carter found you?" "No one else was around?" Dan asked. "Now stop it! Mr. Carter did not lock me in the shed. What would he have to gain from doing that?" "He always seems to show up at just the right time, or he's always there when something happens. It just makes me a little suspicious. We don't really know anything about him. He's new to the community and he's new to the school, and like I said, he's always magically there." I thought about what Dan was saying and had to admit that he wasn't wrong. Mr. Carter was always there when something happened, or he showed up just in the nick of time. Could he really have something to do with all of this? He just didn't seem the type. Then again, I don't know what a murderer looks like, if it is murder. I don't know what they act like. I don't know anything about them. So I guess it could be just about anybody. I thought about what Dan was saying and had to admit that he wasn't wrong. Mr. Carter was always there when something happened, or he showed up just in the nick of time. Could he really have something to do with all of this? Just didn't seem the type. Then again, I don't know what a murderer looks like. I don't know what they act like. I don't know anything about them. So I guess it could be just about anybody. I tend to disagree that Mr. Carter has anything to do with this, but I really don't know, I said to Dan. I handed him the 2 lists that I'd made. He looked them over. It's the same people on both lists, mostly. It's a small community, and there's only a handful of people that do things for the entire community, I shrugged. I better see if I can start talking to some of these people, see if I can shed a little light on what's going on around here. There's enough people around here now that if anybody is targeting you specifically, you should be okay. Just do me a favor and don't go off by yourself anywhere. Maybe have Mrs. Erickson or somebody follow you home tonight. Heck, I'll be here for the dinner. I can follow you home." "I guess that's okay," I agreed with hesitation. I knew Dan had a personal interest in me, but I made it clear over the years that I really wasn't interested in getting involved in a drama-filled life. The more I thought about it, the more I had to agree that it was probably a good idea to have someone follow me home. "I will see you back here for dinner," he said with a smile before turning and heading toward a group of people that were working on setting the tables. I went back into the kitchen of the community center to make sure that dinner was cooking and that everything was ready in there. "Are you okay?" I turned to see Mr. Carter walking toward me. "Yeah, I'm fine. Didn't you know getting locked in sheds, having strangers vandalize my house, and being questioned repeatedly by law enforcement is an everyday occurrence in my life? Totally used to all this." "Ah, sarcasm. Actually, I saw you talking to the sergeant, and you looked kind of perturbed. Just thought your fiancé might have gotten under your skin." "He's not my fiancé. We aren't getting married. We aren't even dating, I growled. Whoa, sorry, he said as he raised his hands in mock surrender. No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to snap at you. I guess I'm a bit on edge. We don't have things like this happen out here, and I'm not really sure I understand what's going on. Why would someone destroy stuff at my home and then lock me in a shed? Is it personal? Could it be a parent of one of my students? I can't think of any reason why someone would do any of this. Sergeant Daniels keeps pushing. I know he wants answers, and I do too. So yeah, I'm probably a little perturbed at the moment, and I in no way meant to take it out on you. I understand. If I can do anything, let me know. It might be best to not go home alone. If you want, I can follow you home and make sure everything's okay, he offered. My mind reeled back to my earlier thoughts of Mr. Carter and his potential involvement in the strange events. Here he was again, offering to help. I waved my hand and said not to worry about it. Sergeant Daniels is going to follow me home. I noticed a quizzical look flash across Mr. Carter's face. I wasn't sure why I felt the need to explain, but I reiterated there was a complete misunderstanding. We are not engaged or involved. We are just friends. We have been friends for many years. His son was in my class my first year as a teacher. Dan was going through a nasty divorce and had just started as a patrol deputy with the sheriff's department. Mr. Carter shrugged and excused himself to go help set tables. Even though I was delayed getting things set up and ready for the dinner, with everyone's help we were able to get the event started on time. I think everyone enjoyed our little community tradition of a spaghetti and meatball Christmas dinner with French bread, salad, and a variety of home-baked treats for dessert. We try to keep with our storyline from the tree lighting, so we don't have a Santa come to the dinner. Instead, we have Mrs. Claus. She passes out the quilts and afghans, socks, mittens, and stocking caps to the senior citizens that joined us for the evening. We always end the evening with Christmas carols. Once the last song was done, everybody packed up and headed home. Committee and I worked to finish cleaning everything up and put things away. Nobody would be back into the community center until New Year's Eve, so we took down all the Christmas decorations and got ready for the New Year's Eve committee to set up for the New Year's Eve celebration. Dan came back earlier in the evening and volunteered to drive a few of the seniors home before coming back to follow me home. Chapter 12. Do you want to come in for a cup of coffee or tea? I asked Dan after he checked around my house. That would be great, he replied. Following me home was probably a little overkill, but thank you again. Hey, you can never be too careful, especially since we don't know what's going on around here. We don't have anything back from the coroner yet, so we need to be cautious, he told me. I wish I could develop stronger feelings for Dan. I know he would be a good partner for me, but I just can't get there. I understand. Do you have any thoughts on who might have locked me in the shed or broken into my garage? As a matter of fact, I have a couple of ideas. I don't know if I want to share them yet, though. Actually, come to think of it, I really shouldn't. I will let you know that I think you're right about Mr. Carter. I don't think he has anything to do with any of this. I didn't ask why the change of mind, but I was glad because I was really starting to doubt him, and I didn't think that was fair to him. Do you think that whoever did these things to me has something to do with the body in Santa's sleigh? I asked, hoping he would have some kind of news he could share. I'm getting closer to an answer on that. We do have an identification, and we're looking into known associates to see if we can pull anything together. That would be great. So what are you doing for Christmas Eve this year? Dan asked. I had a feeling he was going to extend an invitation, which I honestly didn't want to accept. Mrs. Erickson invited me over for a Christmas dinner. What about tomorrow, Christmas Eve? You know that Christmas Eve is my time to unwind. After all the activities I've done for the community, I spend the day in my pajamas eating junk food and watching Hallmark Christmas movies. I knew he was disappointed that once again I turned down his invitation to spend some part of Christmas with him, but I knew in my heart that if I crossed that line, he would take it as a sign that I wanted more of a relationship with him than I did. We said goodnight, and I watched once again as the taillights on his patrol vehicle disappeared out the gate and down the road. It was finally quiet. I had nowhere to be, and nothing to do for the next 36 hours. I woke up sometime around 1 a.m. to a strange noise outside my window. Living out in the country, you get used to the distinct noises, but this one was nothing that I'd recognized. It didn't sound like the wind was blowing anymore, so I grabbed the flashlight and peeked out the window. It startled me to see what I thought was a human out by the chicken coop. Being a little on edge anyway, I sent a text to Dan, who responded immediately that he would be right over. I grabbed my coat and put on my boots. I wasn't sure why. I would not go out after a person. It wasn't 5 minutes later when I saw headlights in the driveway. Thankfully, Dan only lives a couple minutes away. When I heard him shout to stop and come back, I knew something was going on. I waited and watched out the window, peeking between the blinds. I saw him run toward the back of my property. Then I saw flashing red and blue lights come up the road. He must have called for backup. I knew it was only a few minutes, but it felt like hours before I heard a knock on the door. Dan identified himself, so I knew it was fine to open the door. Standing on my porch between Dan and Deputy Salazar was the young Miss Gleason, dressed all in black instead of her usual short skirt and heels. "What's going on?" I asked, looking from one to another, hoping they could provide answers. "It seems as if we found the person who has been causing you trouble," Dan replied. "I don't think I need to introduce you to your colleague, Miss Gleason." "Have you really been the one doing all these things?" I asked, surprised and rather shocked. She shrugged like it was no big deal. "I just wanted to rattle your cage a little." With no hesitation, she admitted, "I didn't mean any harm. I just wanted to win the Citizen of the Year award this year." "You wanted what?" Her confession confused me. "I'll never win it as long as everything you do turns out so perfect." Harassment, vandalism, and holding someone hostage doesn't seem like a very good way to go about winning an award for doing good in the community, Deputy Salazar commented. I was taken aback by her admitting that she'd been the one causing trouble, and even more taken aback when she tried to explain why. Suddenly, she started crying. I just wanted recognition for everything that I do. I wanted Mr. Carter to look at me and not you. You get everything." I went to the kitchen table and sat down in a chair. I was flabbergasted by what she was saying. I didn't know I was in some kind of popularity contest. I've just been doing what I've been doing for 20 years, teaching school and working in the community to try to make it a better place for the residents. She continued with a whine. You have Sergeant Daniels following you around like a puppy dog. Mr. Carter is wrapped around your little finger, and the awards committee thinks you can do no wrong." "It's not about the award. I do this for the people. It is something that I enjoy doing, and they enjoy having me here. Maybe you should try putting your efforts towards something productive instead of harassing people for no reason," I suggested angrily. "Katie, do you want us to press any charges?" "No, I think we can keep this between the four of us. I don't think it needs to go any further. Miss Gleason can work on giving back to the community or join us in organizing some events." "That's the other thing I don't understand. I never see you at any of the events. You don't volunteer for anything. How can you expect to be recognized for things you don't do?" "Do you have any idea what happened to the guy in the sleigh?" I asked Miss Gleason, not knowing what I expected her to say. "Heck no! I might do a lot of things, but I wouldn't kill somebody," she responded in a huff. "How do you know he was killed?" I asked. Before she could answer, Dan interrupted. "Do you need a ride home?" he asked Miss Gleason. She declined his offer for a ride, saying she'd left her car at the end of the road. Deputy Salazar took her to her car, leaving Dan and I alone. "Will you be okay here by yourself?" he asked. "I think so. I had to be all right by myself. What other choice was there? I certainly wasn't going to let a jealous person scare me away from my home, and I wasn't about to let Dan stay with me any longer than necessary. I didn't want to give him any wrong ideas. If you need anything, I'm just a phone call or text away. I'll check on you in a few hours. Try to get some sleep," he said as he got into his car. I waved, then closed the door and made sure it was locked. There was no way I was getting back to sleep after all that. so I decided to go ahead and start my Christmas Eve early. I started a fire in the wood stove, grabbed a blanket, and curled up on the sofa to begin my marathon of Christmas movies. Chapter 13. It took me a few minutes to realize the knocking wasn't on TV or in my dreams. There was someone at my door. When you live in the country and have a gate across your driveway, it is highly unusual for someone to come right up to your door, especially when the sun was just coming up. "Dan, what's going on?" I asked with surprise when I saw him on the front porch. "Sorry to wake you, but I have some information I thought you'd like." "Come in. I'll put on a pot of coffee." "Mr. Reese. Mr. Brett Reese was Santa's name," Dan said, breaking the silence. "I've never heard that name. I don't know if there are any kids in school with the name Reese," I pondered. "Mr. and Mrs. White haven't heard that name either," he said. "Wait. The Whites don't know who the guy is that they hired to replace Mr. White as Santa?" I repeated to make sure I heard him correctly. "I thought that was odd as well. There is someone here in town that Mr. Reese knew. Are you going to tell me or not?" "Listen, Katie, I hate to tell you this, but Mr. Carter was arrested a few minutes ago for the murder of Don Reese," he said calmly. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mr. Carter killed Santa? I had so many questions and wasn't sure which one to ask first. "Are you sure?" "We don't go around arresting people for murder unless we're pretty darn sure they did it," he responded. "I don't understand." I shook my head, then sat down on the sofa. Mr. Carter had only been at the middle school for a few weeks. He took over as the new history teacher when Mrs. Green decided not to return at the end of her maternity leave. His mom moved to Canyon Creek a few years ago after the death of her husband. She grew up in the neighboring town and maintained friendships here over the years. It was a surprise when she announced her son was moving to the area. Rumor had it that he'd been living in Los Angeles, teaching school during the day and writing the next great American novel at night. Evidently, his wife left him for some up-and-coming actor, and publishers had rejected his manuscript over and over. "Are you really surprised?" Dan asked. Yes. Yes, I am. He just doesn't seem capable of murder." "You didn't find it strange that he was always right there when something happened?" "I know. You've said this before. But I really thought he was helpful and trying to fit in here." I shrugged. "Sorry, Katie." "Can I visit him?" I asked. "Are you sure that's something you want to do?" "I'm not sure, but I feel like I should." Dan told me that Mr. Carter was at the county jail and that there were extended visiting hours during the holidays. I excused myself to get dressed and head to the jail. I wasn't sure why I was going or what I was going to say when I got there. Hopefully I would figure it out on my way there. I'd never been to the county jail before. I'd had no reason to be there. It was a small concrete building behind the county courthouse. The grounds were surrounded by a tall chain-link fence with several intertwined strands of barbed wire at the top. I followed the signs to the visitor's entrance and waited in line to show my identification and request that the inmate be brought out for visitation. I took my turn going through the metal detector, then locked my personal belongings in a locker. The next stop was a large room with tables and chairs. I was instructed to find an empty table and wait. It wasn't long before Mr. Carter came through the door and spotted me. He came over and sat down. "Miss Anderson, it's so nice to see you, but you didn't have to come here, especially on Christmas Eve. Sergeant Daniels told me they arrested you for the murder of Santa. I had to come," I explained. "Of course he did. I'm sure he took great pleasure in delivering that bit of news," he grumbled. "Mr. Carter, what is going on?" I demanded. "I didn't kill anyone," he stated bluntly. "Why do they think you did it?" "Two reasons. I was at the scene, and I knew Don Reese," he admitted. "You knew him? But, I know. I said I didn't know him. I had to buy a bit of time to figure out what happened." His explanation made no sense to me. "I don't understand." Mr. Carter started at the beginning and told me the entire story. When he was done, it was up to me whether to believe him or not. On the drive home, I went over everything Mr. Carter told me. I was more confused than ever. Who was telling the truth? There was only one way for me to figure things out. Miss Anderson, Merry Christmas. Hi, Miss Peterson. I'm sorry to bother you on Christmas Eve, but I need to ask you something, I said. I was suddenly very nervous and contemplated turning around. But then I thought of Mr. Carter sitting behind bars on Christmas Eve. If Mr. Carter is wrong, I might lose everything I'd worked for. Confronting the principal of the school about her potential involvement in a murder was risky. Come on in. Can I get you some coffee or tea or something? She asked. Oh, no thank you, I declined. She wasn't aware that this wasn't a social call. What can I do for you? She asked as she sat down on the sofa opposite of the chair I was sitting in. Did you know that Mr. Carter was arrested earlier this morning? Yes, dear. He called me, she said calmly. I must admit, I'm not that surprised. You aren't surprised? I asked in shock. How can you say that? Well, I saw him coming out of the barn, so, she said with an exaggerated sigh. So? That doesn't mean he killed anyone. What were you doing at the barn? I was looking for you. I had the Santa suit. You're saying that Mr. Carter was at the barn before I got there? That confuses me because he didn't show up until after I got there. I guess he was there and left only to come back and pretend like he hadn't been there? She shrugged. I suppose. What made you think I would need the Santa suit? I guess I just thought you should have it in case you needed it, she shrugged. And as it turned out, I did need it. I'll leave you to your holiday. I was concerned about Mr. Carter and wanted to make sure you knew about it. Thank you, Katie. I know you had a thing for him. I'm sorry he turned out to be a bad guy, she said as she wrapped her arms around me in a hug. I made my way quickly to my truck and headed toward Dan's house. I needed to tell him what I'd heard from both Mr. Carter and Mrs. Peterson. Katie, it's nice to see you, he greeted me before I even got out of the truck. Dan, you have to do something. Mr. Carter didn't kill the man in the barn. I'm sorry, Katie. I know you like him, but it's time you faced the fact that he isn't who you think he is. He didn't do it. You have to listen to me. I just came from Miss Peterson's house, I explained. Did you talk to her? She came forward to let us know she saw Mr. Carter leaving the barn at approximately the time the coroner said Mr. Reese died. What was she doing there? I asked. She said she was delivering a Santa suit and some hot cocoa. I wondered, who was she delivering it to? You, I thought, he scratched his head. This is where things get confusing. What do you mean? He asked. When I got to the barn, Mr. Carter was backing his truck up to the barn. He said that Daryl's truck was in the shop, so he volunteered to pull the sleigh. As I was giving him the timeline for the evening, Miss Peterson showed up and said that Mrs. White had called about Mr. White and that she left the Santa suit at the community center. Miss Peterson didn't have the suit with her. She had to go back for it when we realized we needed it. So? That doesn't prove anything, he replied. Miss Peterson isn't normally involved in any part of the parade. She was still at the school when I left that afternoon, and she came from the direction of the school when she came to tell me about Mr. White. I tried explaining, but I could tell his mind was made up. That doesn't mean anything. We have to either have a rock-solid witness that puts her at the scene at the time of death, or we need a murder weapon with her prints on it. Otherwise, we have her witnessing Mr. Carter fleeing the scene the first time, and you fleeing the scene with him a second time. You said there was a connection between Mr. Carter and Mr. Reese. What was the connection? Don Reese and Mr. Carter were involved in an altercation earlier in the year. They did know each other. Don Reese and Mr. Carter were involved in an altercation earlier in the year. They did know each other, Dan assured me. I'm sure you know that Mr. Carter's sister Beth died recently. It is believed that Don Reese had something to do with her death, I informed him. All the more reason that Mr. Carter would kill him, right? Yes, that is the way it looks. Where did Don Reese work? I asked. At the casino out on Highway 32, the one with the horse wearing a cowboy hat. Why? It's the casino that Beth worked at and Ms. Peterson frequented. So, that still means nothing, he argued. Beth had a relationship with Don Reese. When she broke it off, he didn't like that. He tried to get her fired and would regularly follow her home. The night she died, it was storming, blizzard-like conditions. The roads were slick. It was a night he followed her home. Come on, Katie, this is getting old. Everything you are telling me doesn't mean a thing. It does, if you knew that Ms. Peterson was forcibly removed from the casino for causing a disturbance after the bartender refused to serve her any more drinks, and she had taken her limit of money off her debit card and couldn't get a loan from the cashier. So you think, because of that, she killed Don Reese? He threatened to call the school district and report her. How would that look for an elementary school principal? She saw an opportunity to stop him from reporting her. Mr. Carter just happened to be a perfect person to frame for the murder. Wow, that is some elaborate story Mr. Carter has you believing, Dan said as he shook his head. Let's go see how Miss Peterson reacts to the story, I suggested. Chapter 15. I didn't shoot him. I gave him poisoned hot cocoa. Miss Peterson yelled at Sergeant Daniels and me when we accused her of murdering Santa. She realized what she'd blurted out and stopped, looked around, and tried to run toward the door. Sergeant Daniels grabbed her and cuffed her. He read her rights to her and put her in the back of his car in what seemed like a split second. Does this mean that Mr. Carter will be let go soon? I asked. I will call the chief on my way to the jail. He should be released in the next couple of hours. I watched as Dan drove away with Miss Peterson in the back of his car. It was hard to believe someone I'd known for many years had led a second life that we knew nothing about. While I waited for Mrs. Erickson to come pick me up, I made sure Miss Peterson's dog had food and water, unplugged the lights on her Christmas tree, and locked her front door. Is there anyone we should call? Mrs. Erickson asked as I got in her car. I have no idea. Does she have any family around here? Come to think of it, I'm not sure either. I shared the entire story with Mrs. Erickson as she drove me back to my house. When we got there, I thanked her and explained that I wouldn't be joining her for Christmas. I was going to go pick up Mr. Carter, then come home and try to salvage what was left of my Christmas Eve. Merry Christmas, I said a few hours later when Mr. Carter walked out of the front door of the county jail. It is indeed a very Merry Christmas, he said cheerfully. I shared the entire story as we drove back to town. I'm glad Sergeant Daniels finally listened to you, he sighed. It wasn't easy, and to be honest, if Miss Peterson hadn't slipped up and blurted out how she killed Santa, I don't think Dan would have done anything. I'm sure lucky you were in my corner. The thought of spending Christmas behind bars makes me sick, he shuddered. Speaking of Christmas, if you don't have any plans, would you like to come for dinner? It won't be anything fancy, but I'd be happy to celebrate the day and your freedom with you and your mom. Without spending any time thinking, he replied, that would be great. I dropped him off at his mom's house and headed home to begin preparations for company and a Christmas dinner. I had a beautiful quilt I'd made and put away for someone special someday. I got it out, wrapped it, and put it under the tree for Mr. Carter. I had a closet full of gift items I kept on hand for secret pal gifts, birthday gifts, and other last-minute things. I filled a basket for Mrs. Carter and put that under the tree. Then I set about pulling a roast beef from the freezer to thaw. The following morning I got up early and spent time cleaning the house and preparing stuff in the kitchen. About an hour before Mr. Carter and his mom were supposed to arrive, I took a quick shower and got myself ready. I spent an extra few minutes on my hair and makeup. I chose a skirt and Christmas sweater to wear for the afternoon. With a beautiful display of cookies, a red velvet cake, pot roast with carrots and potatoes in the oven, and a few appetizers, I eagerly awaited my Christmas company. How can I ever thank you enough for helping Brian? Mrs. Carter exclaimed as she climbed from the truck. She pulled me into a tight bear hug and cried. I can't imagine what the poor lady had been through after losing her daughter, then almost losing her son. Hi, Miss Anderson. Well, hello, Joey, I said in surprise. Joey is my nephew. I moved here to take care of him," Mr. Carter explained. "He handed me a poinsettia and said he hoped I didn't mind that he brought him along." "You have no idea what a wonderful Christmas the three of you have made for me," I said gleefully. "After all the years I spent Christmas alone, I was overjoyed to have people to spend it with." "The feeling is mutual," Mr. Carter said with a wink. He took my hand and together the four of us went into my house to celebrate the holiday. Merry Christmas. The end.
night. See, I get sidetracked. I wasn't over there to do any cleanup.